take your seats. Please switch off your mobile phones or put them on silent mode. We would appreciate if complete silence is observed while the session is in progress. The session that we are beginning now is Sadequain and the Culture of Enlightenment by Akbar Naqvi. The guest speakers are Nasreen Askari and Saqib Hanif and moderated by Siptain Naqvi. I would like the guest speakers and the moderator to please come on the stage. Siptain Naqvi is head of university relations at Habib University and editor of Hum Khayal, the university's magazine. A graduate of the IBA, he writes for several English publications on a range of subjects that include art, culture, history, education, environment, and social issues. Nasreen Askari is the director and founding curator of the Mohatta Palace Museum, Karachi. She is a cultural anthropologist and author who has been active in the promotion of arts and the traditional crafts of Pakistan since 1975. Saqib Hanif is a communications professional. He studied art history at Cornell University, USA, and has been writing on Pakistan's art scene, initially as part of the Herald's editorial team. He also conceptualized and hosted Framed, an 18-episode series on Pakistani art aired by Dawn News. May we begin the session, please? Thank you. Which side would you like it? This side?
हाँ because they're sitting over there थोड़ा सा मैं कर देता हूँ इसको इसको हटवा दीजिए why don't we call somebody आप छोड़ दीजिए
If you move the white, this will have space.
yes that's
You want to tilt this?
yeah I want to see
Why am I got the mic behind me?
move यार how the
I think I like that little whisper that you did.
I think we can start. Huh? We can start. Good afternoon, Adabarze. Thank you for joining us in this session. It is a launch of Sadequain and the Culture of Enlightenment by Dr. Akbar Naqvi Saab. Unfortunately, Akbar Saab passed away some time back, earlier late last year. And so this is a tribute to him as well as a discussion on his book. My panelists, thank you both of them for being here. They've been introduced by OUP, so I will skip that part. I'll just give an overview of the book before we sort of jump into the discussion. So it covers various aspects of something that we have lost, which is a culture of enlightenment. And when I mean we, I'm talking about the subcontinent as a whole, which includes us as well as India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Something that was quite common just a few decades back. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Should I move this closer? How about now? Okay, thank you. So Dr. Saab's book covers a lot. I mean, it's a slim volume, but it covers people who sort of started the culture of enlightenment, starting from Al-Biruni and Khusro, makes its way through the Sufi tradition to Sadequain, and then talks about the people around him. So, they are his fellow artists, they are the influencers, whether it's Sarmad or Mansoor Hallaj. He speaks about Chugtai, whose Mughal paintings are replete with enlightenment, or Shakir Ali, whose Cubism represented it, or Shahid Sajjad Saab, whose sculpture sort of represented it. Now, these were Sadequain's kindred spirits, but I'd be careful about calling them his peer artists, at least to his face, if he was here, because he sort of saw himself as apart from the art scene, and we will talk about that also. In fact, his peer group included Michelangelo and Ghalib and Khayyam and Sarmad, who he met in his metaphysical journeys. And in fact, this rubai that I will narrate is from him. It sort of talks about that. मैखाने में गहरी जो रात हुई, फिर शहर बनारस में अजब बात हुई, निकला जो खराबात से गालिब से मेरी एक कुएं मलामत में मुलाकात हुई. So he's associating his Malamati tradition with Ghalib, and he just happens to meet him in a street of ill repute. And where else would he be? We have a challenge in front of us, so we have to cover these vast themes as well as Dr. Saab's personality in his book. And the challenge is 30 minutes. So I will jump right into it, and I will appreciate if our responses were accordingly to that. Sakisa, we'll actually start with you, even though it should be ladies first, but as a prerogative of the thank you so much. You hosted Dr. Saab for a program in your framed series. Rather, the series was called Frame. On good one. So I'm working in different tongues. So you hosted him for that program, and I understand that Dr. Saab was working on this book at that time, and a lot of that was discussed at that time, sort of comes out. I will quote Dr. Naqvi and then ask you to comment about it. He writes, Sadequain celebrated the vision apocalypse here and now from the point of view of man's irremediable fall from heaven. Now, generally Muslim art is about, heaven or paradise, whether it is Khattati or whether it is painting, and this sort of hellish, this sort of constant allusions to the inferno and pain is something which is not really seen in Muslim art. What do you have to say about that?
I think that's what Sadequain's major contribution was. I think can you guys hear me? The major contribution was sort of opening the gates of hell for Pakistani art. I mean, the quintessential, the traditional view of Pakistani art is the replication of paradise on earth. And he opened the windows to hell and to purgatory, to
Damnation.
Sinfulness. So I think this is his major contribution. And once Sadequain opens that portal, Pakistani art really doesn't remain the same. And the fact that he achieved the kind of beauty that he did, even in his visions of hell, and he marshaled like a whole cast of characters. which were his creations. And every time, at least, I I visualize a monster. I do so, the hairy, Dio-like figure, with a garland of skulls or something like that. But he made the horrible beautiful. That's what's important. And Dr. Saab used to say a lot of that, and that's Sadequain's particular contribution to Pakistani art, even in Muslim art.
Right. So he saw himself obviously as a Malamati, and there was a controversy in 1973 in which some people objected to him making calligraphy. So he actually did a program in which he invited people, and I happened to have a card from that program, and the invitation said that, and this is him talking about himself, Maslake Sarmidi, sorry, let me say that again. Maslake Sarmadi ka Mashicha Bajuz do Harfe Laila.
Who's understanding that one now?
It's Farsi, so I'll plunge ahead.
Okay.
अपने पास कुछ भी नहीं रखने वाला, शहरों का रकीब, मस्कीनो गरीब, आयात का कातिल, बंदा असुदा का गालिब, दुनियावी तरीके से कंगाल, रूहानी तौर पे मालामाल, मुस्तर, बेकल, बेचैन, फ़कीर सादक़ैन. So he's really owning that Malamati tradition, that name. And then he goes on to also talk about himself in sort of al-qabat, which is like the anti of God's name. So he calls himself al-jahil and other things which are again in this book. As a hero. So he's taking that. But moving on to, I want to sort of talk to you, Sin Saiba, that this whole Malamati tradition is generally a poetic trope. Not seen so much in art. Why was he doing that, and what does it really represent?
I think Sadequain was very self-assured. He was very confident, and even though he presented himself as a Malamati, the question that I would like to pose is that, was this a tool for the production of his art, and how seriously did he take it?
I think, as we were discussing in the preparatory session, Nasreen, this whole concept of malamat, of self-aggrandizement that you see in Sadequain, I think that was fueled by the fact that he had to emerge as an entity versus the NCA group. And he was...
The Lahore group, yeah.
Sort of, when I wrote on Sadequain, I said that, looking at Sadequain is like looking at a mirrored ball with facets of mirrors, So whatever pencil of light you cast on him, he comes out that way. He's a very, very slick marketeer. And he makes sure that he emerges as a persona, as an artistic entity.
He assembled his own legacy.
Exactly. And he is continually writing about himself. He is, like Michelangelo, Van Gogh, he is leaving a written record of his work, his vision, and his feelings.
And his poetry.
And so, here is an artist who has curated himself into legend.
So you're sort of talking about the Behrupia aspect of what Dr. Saab has written about the book also. But so he's a fakir, he's a Malamati Sufi. In his own words, he's a showman who has much to show to the world. These are different aspects, or is there really one Sadequain that all of us are trying to sort of fit into a mold that we can understand?
I think that's why Dr. Saab uses the concept of Behrupia. I think he is the opportunist supreme. And Sadequain lands up at the right place at the right moment in time. And while he is a fakir and he is, shown as that martyr figure, empathizing with Sarmad, with Mansoor Hallaj, you see him as the quasi-official artist of Pakistan. Here is this guy who comes out, goes to Paris, affiliates himself with Albert Camus of all people, and does a series of lithographs for L'Étranger, the stranger. This guy is always there. He's talking about dictators, yet he is feted by them. The exhibitions are inaugurated by military dictators whom he's raged against
That's right.
throughout his art. So
Yes.
you see, he's
There's
a lot
this
of
paradox.
contradictory,
Yes.
Yeah.
contradictory personas.
And he becomes an artist of the establishment then by becoming a calligrapher.
Can I just
Because
interject?
that was the acceptable form.
Right. So Dr. Naqvi actually starts the book by this sentence. Let me just read it out. Framing Sadequain has become a fraught and contested exercise. The often arbitrary invention of categories and constructs to elucidate the persona and work of Sadequain demonstrates an uneven, incomplete understanding of history and his cultural context. So Dr. Naqvi is actually sort of throwing it towards us that maybe our understanding, in the sense that this holy sinner binary that sort of we have created, essentially there's neither holy nor sinner. He's holy because of being this malamati, this person who's debasing himself in front of God and coming out. So I'll keep going back to that question that, like for instance, you mentioned him trying to work with dictators, but just give me a second. But was he doing that to further his career, or was he doing that to expose him through his hypocrisy, which he also said? So,
Well, he
I
keeps,
think- sorry.
that's where Malamat comes
When
in.
you finish.
Sorry, bolo.
Saqib, you're extremely articulate, so I daren't interrupt. I think there is this duality here. The Holy Sinner was a very evocative novel by Thomas Mann about a medieval man, I suppose, yes, who was a sinner, who was a reprobate, who had no redeeming qualities. But he went on to discover God and ultimately became the Pope. So this juxtaposition was picked up, I think, in an exhibition that was held at the Mohatta Palace Museum. And Dr. Saab alludes to it in his book as being not a title that is organic to our culture. I would actually disagree with that, because this duality, after all, we are all Malamati. But this duality in Sadequain manifests itself because his art derives from it. So he had this public persona which he was very interested in crafting. So he was a sinner, he drank, he transgressed the word of God, but at the same time he was very respectful. He had a strong and very rooted faith in the Shia tradition. So he continued this duality
Yeah, I
and
think so.
derived from it the fruits of his craft.
Dekhiye, duality is something he not only continued with, but he literally sort of nourished it.
Yes.
And the juxtaposition of holy and sinner in itself, is a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
But here is an artist who manages to be holy despite being a self-proclaimed sinner. And that's what's interesting about him. आप ये देखिए कि सादिकैन ने अपने आप को किस मकाम पे पहुंचाया. At a time when there were no auctions, no high bids, where paintings sold for a couple hundred rupees at best. आप देखें उसने किस तरह का persona किया. अगर इसको historical context में तुम देखो, तो Renaissance, high Renaissance में ये होता है. When Michelangelo starts to work, I mean at that time the artists have come out of the guild structure, and they become, sort of legends in themselves, where artists are literally given an entrance to every place. They curry establishment favor and are celebrated as individuals. ये सादिकैन ने भी पाकिस्तान में किया. आप देखें, look at the stalwarts working concurrently with Sadequain.
right.
And how else would he emerge from from Karachi, with the kind of established artistic community in Lahore?
Right. Early on, I sort of alluded to that he never really saw himself as part of the group. You won't see a picture of him standing with
Yes,
with
exactly.
Shakir Ali or Ahmed Parvez or other people, while they have several pictures on that. So he always saw himself as the stranger, right? So that Albert Camus work.
Yeah, stranger, but a stranger who was estranged by self-limiting his circle of art.
But at the same time, Saqib, he thrived on
अब चल गया.
Here he was, a Malamati, clad in an impeccable sherwani, perfectly coherent, and seeking the presence of others, of those whose approval he sought, and at the same time projecting himself as a recluse,
As
as socially undesirable perhaps, kind of dichotomy, insecurity, at the same time confidence, at the same time supremely aware of what he could do and what would get him the approval that he sought.
I'll narrate an anecdote that, Syed Shajad, a great mentor, a father figure for me.
I was hoping you would come to this anecdote actually.
Okay, जब वो सादिक़ैन से मिले तो सादिक़ैन का शाहिद का एग्जीबिशन था जिसमें सादिक़ैन भी थे. ये आर्ट्स काउंसिल में एग्जीबिशन हुआ था. एंड शाहिद, आई रिमेंबर शाहिद साहब टेलिंग मी दिस कि उन्होंने शाहिद को बोला कि तुम चूंटी जितने भी नहीं हो मेरे सामने. I mean, can you imagine the arrogance and
confidence,
and the confidence to say all of that, and yet he goes on to do everything he stands apart from.
Yeah.
Here's a guy standing against the tide and doing and flowing with it so mellifluously.
The full statement is तुम मेरे सामने चूंटी जैसे हो, अगर मैं चलूं तो तुम्हें रोंगता हुआ चला जाऊंगा.
बिल्कुल.
The other sort of incident is that once Ali Imam Saab was sort of with him and saying that, in a general sort of statement that not every work of art is a masterpiece. So he said very clearly, तुम भाई दुकान चलाओ, तुम्हारा क्या काम है इन सब. So he was very, very dismissive, but he was able to get away with it, and at the same time sort of draw this circle. So you had Zulfikar Ali Bhutto visiting Saptain Manzil and the world elite sort of coming to him, even though he's not directly reaching out to him. So he was able to, and then he was also able to reinvent himself constantly through the eras, starting off from figurative art and basic drawing of females and all to abstract art and cactus cities, and then ending up with calligraphy and all those murals. So he's constantly sort of working around that.
Saqib, why do you think Dr. Saab says that he was allowed to get away with it?
I think he permitted himself that space and allowance. I don't think anyone was positioned among his coterie of people to actually allow him something. He had reached the kind of level where he would state, his own graces, so to say. तो आप ये देखें कि जब वो फेयर हॉल में काम कर रहा है और उसमें कैलीग्राफी कुरान के सूरह रहमान की हो रही है, Ziaul Haq is sending him cartons of scotch. I mean,
that's a hypocrite. So he's actually,
that's really important.
Yeah.
And he's still on the floor and seeing everybody, and एक पूरा दरबार लगा हुआ है, और
behaving in a melodramatic way.
कराची की सबसे ज़्यादा खूबसूरत औरतें और इस्टेब्लिशमेंट के सारे लोग, आर्मी के जर्नल सब आते हैं.
मुझे याद है कि वो सूरह रहमान की सीरीज बना रहे थे, and that was the night that Muhammad Ali Clay lost, and he turned to me and he said, इस्लाम के आखिरी पसंदीदा बंदे की शिकस्त मुलाहिजा फरमाइए.
No, he was
so he was very witty. He was constantly quipping.
He's very witty. He was very quotable. This whole possessed by fairies and possessing jinn and all those things, talking in third person, connecting himself with the greats of the past, calling Picasso a fellow artist, all of these things. So he's sort of mining his background, right? This early childhood in Amroha, in which he's surrounded by other giants and fellow peers, John Elia, Taqi Amrovi, Kamal Amrovi, and all those things. Must have been a fascinating childhood to move from there, then come to, and this is the first time he's traveling outside Amroha when he comes to Karachi. And at the age of 26, he's being hosted by the Prime Minister of Pakistan. I mean, no artist has done well so quickly anywhere, I guess. What was going on over there?
Sorry. There is one thing though, and I may be wrong on this, is that I want to question, why is it that Dr. Akbar Naqvi in his book has not emphasized the rootedness of Sadequain in his Shia faith.
So in a way he has. He's said that
Do you think
the Khattati tradition is essentially coming from Imam Ali and all
Yes,
that.
but do you think he has focused on it as much as was the driving force for Sadequain, or one of the driving forces?
देखिए वो अल हिंद में रजाकारी की बात बार बार करते हैं डॉक्टर साहब, और he does establish, sort of he traces Sadequain's enlightenment or the culture of that enlightenment to al-Biruni, to Khusro, and he says this is where the train starts from, and I think
But Al-Biruni, but the whole Sufi order is actually going back to Imam Ali. I mean, the whole concept of Wiladat comes from the concept of him being the wali. So, in every sense, I mean, other than Naqshbandi order, every Sufi order is actually tracing themselves back. So, so by extension, I mean, it's a mathematical thing. If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, therefore A is equal to C type situation. That if you're sort of turning this around. But to answer your, actually, so you have sort of taken over my duties, but
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
But no, you're more than welcome to. But going back, yes, to the answer is no. Dr. Saab does it in a sort of circuitous way, but he does not make a direct distinction. In fact, he's written over here that he did not hear Dada talk too much about Imam Ali. He's written this in the book. However, his own iconography, his own symbolisms, the Alam, the Sarbakaf series, which is obviously an allusion to both Sarmad and Hussain, is there in the art. Saqib Sahab, what do you have to say about that?
Would you agree?
I'm not following the question, Siptain. Zara ek dafa phir, can you sort of reiterate it for me? I'm sorry.
Sure. Nasreen Saiba picked up the line of questioning the conversation. Ke ye jo this sort of Shia tradition. Dr. Naqvi has not mentioned it in the book in a direct way, but unka kaam
He hasn't emphasized it.
He has, but
He's alluded to it.
He's alluded
yes.
to it, but उन्होंने directly नहीं. But even though उनका अपना काम जो है उसमें मुहर्रम के अलाम उसमें जो है वो सरबकफ वगैरह इमाम हुसैन के all of that is very much there. His rubai is actually full of it, which you earlier said that is sort of like a testament to his, or a reflection of his visual work.
देखिए, I think Shiaism, Dr. Saab is talking about the culture, and I think I think everybody is entitled to look at to answer your question, Nasreen. I think Dr. Saab ने जो शिया एलिमेंट था उसकी आर्ट में, जो कि बहुत था, सर बकफ, लहू, नेज़े, जो उनकी खत्ताती थी वो sort of अलिफ की चोंच पे ख़त्म होती थी, razor sharp and everything. I think ये एक शिया कल्चर है. बट डॉक्टर साहब ने I think मैंने डॉक्टर साहब के साथ एक शो किया था, और I think it was called Peril in Paradise, जिसमें आपके वालिद सुल्तान नकवी साहब भी थे. तो डॉक्टर साहब ने वो शो शुरू किया था, और वो जब भी सादिक़ैन की बात करते थे, आई एम ट्राइंग टू वेयर द कन्वर्सेशन नाउ टुवर्ड्स डॉक्टर साहब,
राइट,
जब भी वो सादिक़ैन की बात करते थे तो वो कहते, राबिया बसरी की एक कहावत जो थी वो रिपीट करते थे कि मैं जन्नत को जला दूंगी और दोज़ख को बुझा दूंगी. And this is again that contrariety,
just to carry a flame,
sort of very contrapuntal,
just to carry a mashal and a bowl of water in both hands and sort of walk through the bazaar.
वो जो मेरी जब भी, और सादिक़ैन के बारे में डॉक्टर साहब से मेरी बहुत बात होती थी, लड़ाई भी बहुत होती थी वैसे, बट बात भी बहुत होती थी. His take on Sadequain was to sort of establish Sadequain's credibility, yes, borrowing from the Malamati tradition, but this whole Behrupia concept, and throughout he is quoting a sense. I mean, there is a stream of culture and tradition that accompanies Sadequain throughout his trajectory. चाहे वो जर्नैलों के पास बैठते थे या हुक्मरानों के पास बैठते थे, उनका जो persona होता था वो मलामती ही होता था. He called himself the artist of the dustbin in a very famous interview with Hamid Harun.
Yeah.
And हर खूबसूरत औरत की कराची सोसाइटी की उसने तस्वीर बना के और
उनको तोहफा
गुलाबी शायराना तरीके से उनको तोहफा दी.
आपकी बनाई होगी यकीनन, तो खूबसूरत और
बदकिस्मती से. नहीं.
But जी साहब.
तो यू नो द थिंग इज कि डॉक्टर साहब का जो टेक था वो यही था कि जी मुझसे वो हमेशा जब ये कहते थे कि यार देखो इसने इस्टेब्लिश अपने आप को कैसे किया और कितना ग्रैंडिलिक्वेंटली किया और डर के बगैर किया. इतनी सारी चीज़ें कोई कर रहा हो और आजकल जितनी आर्ट क्रिटिसिज्म होती है, आर्ट क्रिटिसिज्म होती है कि नहीं, बट आर्ट राइटिंग तो होती है
और ज़्यादातर इनकॉम्प्रिहेंसिबल होती है.
खैर वो एक अलग बहस है.
Coming straight from the heart.
आप ये भी देखें कि डॉक्टर्स किस किसने लिखा. आई मीन फैज वुड राइट द फॉरवर्ड्स टू सादिक़ैन's exhibitions. I mean this is as you know sort of blue-blooded as it gets from the intelligentsia.
Very much so. Yeah.
And yet he said कि मुझे कुछ आता नहीं, मैं अनपढ़ हूँ, मैं फकीर हूँ.
But when you would say something and then he would come back and tell you कि नहीं मैं क्या हूँ. So he's sort of unsettling almost, right? So he's keeping you off balance.
You know उनकी शख्सियत को टटोलना ही उनके काम का मजा है.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And,
Deconstruct करना. Deconstruct करना उनका काम.
Absolutely. This is a fascinating discussion, and we can go on about it till till midnight. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I'll just look at do we have time for one question? Okay, all right. So,
जी शिरीन कुछ पूछना चाह रही हैं.
जी इनको जरा mic please दे दीजिए.
We can rely on you, Shireen.
We'll take one over here and then one at the back.
I'll just take 1 minute. From this very scintillating conversation, one gets a very negative impression of Sadequain. And yet there is this dichotomy that he's a veritable hero.
देखिए वो अगर होशियार है तो उसमें नेगेटिविटी क्या है? मुझे तो ये नहीं समझ में आता.
जो आप कह रहे हैं ना बहरूपिया था और ये चीजें, ये तो अच्छी चीज नहीं है.
माइक जरा करीब कीजिए प्लीज.
जी
माइक जरा करीब कीजिए.
बहरूपिया था, अथॉरिटेरियंस के साथ मिलता रहता था, तो ये चीजें तो सब नेगेटिव है ना.
आपका सवाल क्या हुआ?
आपका सवाल ये है कि डाइकोटमी नेगेटिव है.
इस किस्म का एक हीरो जैसे कहते हैं कि द होली सिनर माना जाता है.
देखिए उनकी खास बात ये थी कि गोया उनमें इतनी ये sort of contradictions थी. He came together as an artist, and we still remember Sadequain not as an artist of the establishment, but as an artist right from the core of the Malamati tradition. आप उसकी achievement तो देखें. Just because he curated himself does not really shed negative light. आप समझ रही हैं मैं क्या बोलने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ. And I think there is great creativity in the way he curated himself. और उसके काम को तो चैलेंज हम नहीं कर रहे, लेकिन काम ही रह जाता है. और आज सादिक़ैन का काम by its sheer acreage and by its sheer skill, अब सादिक़ैन के नाम को तो हम मतलब उसको तो आंच नहीं लगा रहे, बट सादिक़ैन की पर्सनालिटी में ये है. And he works it to his advantage.
Actually,
we'll move to the next question if you don't mind. There's a question over there and then one at the back.
Is it working? Yeah.
Yes, it's working.
I don't have a question, I have a comment.
Please keep it short then.
Yeah, it will be short. I find it very hard to believe that for a person like Sadequain would say something like this to an artist कि तुम्हारा काम तो मेरे मुकाबले में कीड़े के मुताबिक भी नहीं है. You said something of that nature.
No, but this happened and much more happened. Please, you have to believe it.
No, I will tell you.
We have eyewitnesses.
Okay, so here is an account of somebody who spent a childhood with Sadequain. My mother used to write, and she got intrigued by him and totally fascinated, and she started painting. And there was one way of saying that, Fana, you can't paint. नहीं कर सकती तुम. उन्होंने बहुत ही सटल तरीके से मेरी वालदा को बोला that Fana, अगर तुम रंगों की दुनिया में गई तो तुम लिखना भूल जाओगी.
देखिए डिफरेंट साइड्स हैं. उनका ये भी था कि किसी की शादी हो रही है तो उसको जो है वहीं बना के कुछ दे दिया कि बेच के अपनी जो बेटी के जहेज करो. There are many different sides
I'm sure. So one side of him where you have, I find it very maligning the way it has been put across, with due apologies.
No, that's okay.
There are certain very good incidents as well of Sadequain. He was a great checkers player. He used to take hours and hours to play checkers, and there
ठीक
was
है.
not an ounce where I thought
ठीक
that
है.
he
Thank
would
you.
be
Thank you for your
something like
comment.
that.
Thank you for
Thank
all your
you.
comments. We'll take a question at the back, please. The gentleman at the back.
मुझे ऐसे में कोई कमेंट नहीं करना, सिर्फ एक उनकी रुबाई सुनाना चाह रहा हूँ आपको, उससे उनका जो नज़रिया था सूफीज़म का वो भी आपकी समझ में आ जाएगा।
सुल्तान साहब थोड़ा सा माइक करीब कर लीजिए।
है कि है मसलके कुफुर में कब कच्चा काफिर, है मसलके कुफुर में कब कच्चा काफिर, ईमान का नहीं देता गच्चा काफिर, मेरी तो नज़र में है बहुत ही बेहतर झूठे मुसलमान से सच्चा काफिर।
वाह वाह, वाह वाह।
So that Rubai sums it up.
Sort of sums it up,
right?
yes,
And I
indeed.
think that I cannot think of a better conclusion to this fascinating talk. Once again, Saqib Saab, shukriya bahut bahut. Nasreen Saiba, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Nasreen is
thank
actually
you.
opening an exhibition on Tuesday. She's been working around the clock, and Saqib Saab just told me that he finished the book last night at 2:30 for the fourth time.
No, for the first time.
For the
Me
first
for the first time.
So thank you so much. The book is available at OUP, would be outside. I would encourage you to please
It's
buy it and read it.
available at the end of the hall, inside, if anybody is interested.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks a
very
lot.
much जी, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।
Hello, hello. Our next session in this room is a book launch of How Pakistan Got Divided by Major General Rao Farman Ali. The guest speakers are Ilhan Niaz, Aqila Ismail, Shafiqur Rahman and Zafar Hilali. Moderator for the session is Ghazi Salahuddin. Thank you.